look at places like the Congo, where Patrice Lumumba was unceremoniously removed from power in Congo, and Cisse Seko was put there, and this brother used to bathe himself in Chanel No. 5.
Mad.
But he represents the will of his European handlers in the same way that Thomas Sankara, when he was leader of Burkina Faso, was like, I'm not going to have air conditioning in my office because the people of Burkina Faso do not have it, back when it was called Upper Voltaire. So what the French did is that they found a group of, I suppose, bougie people, the bourgeoisie, that were in Burkina Faso, and was like, if you get rid of him, we'll break you lot off with a couple, you could get your Mercedes back and all the rest of it. And to some people, like, as long as I'm nice, the community will have to sort itself out. And that's the thing, is that, like, when we talk about kind of like humanist or equality initiatives, and we talk about like bringing everybody in, it's a task that seems unfairly always, it seems like an unfair obligation that only we have to deal with. Like, when you're a white footballer and you get signed and you get your check, and no one's like, well, you give back to your community though. If you're a K-pop artist and you bust and you do amazingly, there's no question going to be asked about what you're doing to help out the impoverished Koreans in Gangnam. No one's going to ask you that. But there seems to be, there's a lot more of a social obligation. And there's a lot of historic and cultural reasons for that. But there's always a lot more of an obligation.
Is it relevant then? Is it?
I mean, it's always. I mean, I could argue, as a social species, as in human beings, then it is relevant, because what is the point in you sitting at? For me, what's the point of sitting at a banquet table and having all the food on one side of your stuff in your face, and it's just emaciated, hungry people at your table? Like, how can you continue to enjoy that? In the same way that it's like, I look at it very simply, innit? If you are going to deprive people and you're not going to share people, then no one stays on top forever. You cannot expect these people to want to help you when you're having hard times. Or the other way I say it as well is that I always see an interesting pattern of behavior, that we want money and people want to have individual success, but then we spend our money trying to get validation from outside of ourselves. So people are like, I'm about to get money for myself, I'm about to get my own bag. But then you go to a club and you'll get a table and you'll do the drinks with the sparklers because you want everyone to look at me and aspire to be who you are.
The other day with a man with his head dipped over, and you know, like, obviously man spray champagne and that's been a thing for a few years now. When I first saw it, I thought it was dumb, still think it's dumb, but point being is, the new sensation seems to be, and I've only seen it once, is a man rinsing his hair out in a club with a bottle of Hennessy. Like, he's literally dipped over and a man is got the Hennessy bottle over his head, pouring it, and he's rubbing his head as if to say, yeah, I'm washing my hair, kind of thing. And
I'm washing my hair with alcohol. Now, when you ask yourself, the owner of luxury brands like Hennessy and the owner or Diageo, you think the CEO of Diageo has ever poured drink over his headpiece? Do you think the person that owns these things like Bacardi and all these other things, do you think the board of directors for the Diageo group have ever stood together and started pouring drinks on their head? They would never do that. So again, it's like, it shows it's people that have not had access to capital. But like I said, it's that there's obviously something inside where people feel they have to show off this opulence all the time. Because I don't know what car Bill Gates drives. In fact, I do know. It's a basic Camaro that he's had for years. Whereas, you know, if Bill Gates wants to invest very much into Mercedes or Bentley, he could, and he would be nice. But it goes back to what I said to you before, is that we'll buy Maybachs and all the rest of it, but we still don't have no automotive industry on the continent or in any respective country with a large population of the diaspora.
Then you said things are changing. People are, you know, amassing certain amounts of wealth. So I am hoping that what we start to see is that the millionaires within our community start to think about these sort of things, because it's not something that we can't do. You know what I mean?
But we're seeing it as we discussed before. Like, we're seeing that with, like, for me, like I said, something like Nala's Baby is amazing. I think something like Prep Protect with J2K is amazing as well. I think that these movements, or like, you know, seeing someone like Skepta moving into the fashion sector as well, like, particularly even in the UK with Mains, like, we're starting to see these things. But I think there's also parts that we don't necessarily see. And, you know, I mean, even Stephen Bartlett as well. You know, there is this idea that we are beginning to assume positive positions within the corporate space, and not just being used or being having people work us like puppets to promote brands without us receiving like a good amount of equity. But this is what the E part of DEI is that we're, the things that we are helping
depends where you are geographically, innit? Because in certain places there's talk about equality rather than equity. So I mean, a whole different argument.
Exactly.
But just to finish up on Donald Trump, what I found interesting about that as well was the whole JFK, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X reports being released. And apparently we shouldn't expect them until the third quarter of this year. But what are your thoughts? Because I think it would be fucking good to know what happened with JFK, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X, and get the unrefuted truth if we get the unrefuted truth. Because remember as well, before Trump, everyone's been reluctant to do it. And it might have something to do with timing, because anyone involved that was complicit and could be arrested or do any time or have their
dead or retired.
Dead or retired, you get me? So that might be a case of the reason why they're doing it. And I hope that it is the truth that they bring out. But it's also good to know that they're actually going... It's going to be released.
I mean, they say they're going to.
What say you? I mean, he said that last time, to be fair.
He said that, but then it didn't happen. And I feel like I am, again, cynical. And my cynicism comes from the fact that I think I kind of know what happened already. The government killed, well, of those 3 men, I know 2 of them were killed by the government in a counterintelligence program. And they were killed for very similar reasons.
Well, I mean, Martin Luther King, the American government have actually taken responsibility for his murder.
His family were paid out in a civil case in 1999.
A lot of people don't know this, you know what I mean? So, but for me, it would be really good to know what happened with Malcolm X.
Well, I think it's very similar. I think that he was considered a threat to the US government. I think that
obviously
his visit, his pilgrimage and doing Hajj and coming back and changing his name and becoming an Orthodox Muslim and talking about people being equal under God is the part of Islamic rhetoric that Americans hate, which is too close to socialism. Everyone being the same under God means the same. What? Everyone wants to get the same amount of money.
Yeah.
He's got to go, and I think it's quite simple. I think that for me, I don't really need to know how these men died. I know that they were killed unjustly, and I know that the government had a large part of it. Because,
but I think there's an importance for it to be highlighted, especially now when we're having a new, especially coming from our culture, we're having a new generation of leaders coming through that don't even necessarily know the impact that these people had. So, you know, there's a lot of people that don't even know who Marcus Garvey is. Anyone watching this, please do your research. You know what I mean? Like, it's very important for us to know these things, because these are the men, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King. These are the people that actually...
Or Darcus Howe or Bernie Grant. Mary Seacole, you have to, especially in the UK.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of time in the UK, people tend to act like we didn't have a civil rights movement, and there weren't people that were fighting for progression and writing for equality in the UK. And I think that's important that we talk about as well. And also, it's important that we talk about the fact that Malcolm X, for example, his mother was from Grenada, and Marcus Garvey's secretary was Malcolm X's father.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So this is how deep it runs. I think that it's definitely important for people to know the cultural impact. I think that I personally, again, would encourage people to do their own research and not to rely on any government resources to give you an idea of who someone like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King was.
Because, and also, it's not, again, like, because it can sound very preachy when you're telling people to go and seek out these people, but you have to understand the gravitas, because we didn't just fall out the sky. We had leaders. I'm showing you that we're doing things, and I wouldn't even argue it. I'm telling you as a fact that without them, we wouldn't have progressed this far.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? And these people risk their lives for the liberties that we now enjoy today, especially in the West. You get
small, and these are things that we definitely take for granted, because you know, I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing all the time, but you know, now as a black person, if a white person in public historically is flippantly or casually racist to you, you can be like, who the fuck are you talking to, bro? And most of the time, people will think twice before they think about crossing a black person. I would definitely attribute that to the leaders that we're discussing. I think it's the action of people like Malcolm X and people's militants.
Let's call them assertive.
Yeah. Because, but you know, these are important things. These are very small things that we don't think about. Like, even the fact that people would be like, "What's up, man?" In America, would be like, "What's up, man?" That comes from jazz singers and jazz artists in America, because what they used to call black men is boy. Where you going, boy? So they say, I'm not a boy, I'm a man. So that's why people say, well, hey man, what's up, man? Because it was about asserting your masculinity.
Yes.
When your humanity and your masculinity was being robbed of you and you would just be referred to as a boy or an uncle, it was no, I am a man. And that is why people say, what's up, man? That is a very important thing. And so, these are very important things for us to know. And, they're good. And especially when we have conversations about mental health and well-being, it's important for people to know these things as well. I would suggest that people read the autobiography of Malcolm X, not just because you need to understand the ideology, but you will feel less alone if you are experiencing the black experience like most of us are, and the negative aspects of that. People that talk about it in an open and candid way will allow you to not feel like you're going mad in a world that's changing, or a world that seems to
also
downplay your humanity. It's important.
One of the biggest reasons why to know this as well is because it shows you there is a foundation on which we can start to prop ourselves up on and start to build and accumulate generational wealth that can contribute to our political clout. Then we can translate that into
and also talk about the lack of equity within the financial landscape. Because what people tend to not know about someone like Martin Luther King, for example, is that obviously people like to pedestalize him on this basis of non-violent resistance and unity. But Martin Luther King, to the latter parts of his life, started to get very savvy to the gatekeepers that were preventing his march from equality from continuing, and not just became an activist for black people, but an anti-poverty activist and an anti-war activist, because he understood that one of the reasons for the poverty in our respective countries is how much money goes towards wars. He understood as well that where, same issues we're dealing with today, access to healthcare and access to housing, just having this grounding to allow you to realize your potential as a human being, that these things stop you from doing that. And he was beginning to speak out against people that were impeding that, and this is why they got rid of him.
So you see, where I really want to pull it to is the when you look at all of these things, you zoom out and you really take these points from a marginal loss point of view, and then we look at the road to wealth report, where we are predicted as the median wealth of black families is projected to be 0 by the 2052, I think it was. And
which is basically within a generation.
Right. You know what I mean? So this is where we need to identify where we're coming from, the foundations that we do have, what we do collectively have, and what we can do to pull this together to change the trajectory of the median wealth being 0 of the black family. Like this, that to me is crazy to know that is where we're potentially heading. You know what I mean? So all of these things are, because what I don't want to do is kind of speak over people's head too much. Let them understand, you get what I mean? What really the day-to-day impact of these things are. It might sound very like outside your remit, but it's not.
No, it's not. It's important, and it's based on, like, where economists have spoken about the fact that money within other cultures and ethnicities, whether it's the Jewish community or the Indian community, the money circles and remains back in that community, and before it leaves the community, will go through that community maybe 3 to 5 times, whereas that happens only once within the black community, if that. Because a lot of the time, even when we're displaying our opulence, the indicators of wealth for most people end up being things that are outside of the black community. So, for example, whether you're buying a whip or you're buying, a house, these are things that we're not going to benefit from because we don't own that much land in this part of the world, or we don't own big estate agents. And so,
you know what, I do have, the only thing I would say with that is, and this is probably only a small part of it in terms of a rebuttal, when we are providing products and services, I feel like we need to compete better generally, because there's black businesses, I feel like we take things for granted. Businesses within the culture, we can sometimes take things for granted.
I think that's we take one another for granted. That's the problem. Like I think you're saying the same thing, innit? That we sometimes assume that because we've made it, that by the merit of us just being a black business, people should buy from us.
No, I don't. Yeah, you know,
I see that.
Customer service is a big one. Just basic. You know what I mean? And when you consider that you're competing, once you're in the marketplace, you're competing against bare businesses. It's not just you. So if anything, if I tell my son you have to work twice as hard as your white counterpart to succeed in school, in the workplace, blah blah blah. Not that I have a son, but the saying. Why would it be different if you own a business as a black business?
I mean, I don't think it should be different. I think,
No, no,
but yeah, you're saying
yeah.
rhetorically, but I think, but I would put that down to the lack of experience. We've not been able to have access to business and capital for a very long time, and so learning on how to be an effective competitor, learning how to provide service with the resources at our disposal has not always been something that we've had. So I
Right,
think
and that's fair.
yeah,
That's a fair thing to say. But then I also feel like when we are feeding, when we're giving feedback
yeah,
to the businesses within our in our culture, it's not always met with positivity.
yeah,
You get what I mean?
yeah.
Like, and that's not because I always feedback
Mm.
because for me, I want to see people strive and thrive. You get what I mean? So especially
No, ain't no one trying to hear that in the takeaway, bro.
what, brother, listen, if you've done something that, you get me, I will politely just say, yo, rare, or this, that, boom, bam, bam. You get me? Because
Yeah,
if I don't, then you're just gonna be going away about your day unaware,
yeah, of course.
thinking, oh, this is how you do business. And
Yeah.
what happens is gradually, as everybody's improving, you're just staying the same, or
Yep.
your level of service is being low anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then people will just stop shopping with you or
Yep.
stop buying your products and services. You get what I'm showing you. So we need to, as a community and as a culture, understand that we are in the marketplace to compete. Your end-to-end workflow process is important, and every part of that end-to-end workflow process. Know your competitors are trying to improve marginally their end-to-end workflow process as to attract more customers.
Yeah.
If you're not doing the same thing, you're gonna fall behind.
Agreed. But I still think that is also down to resources because, you know, you look at basic consumer products, like a lot of the products we use, like for example, might be owned by Procter and Gamble or Unilever, and they have enormous wealth at their disposal to kind of deal with stuff.
I think that's a worst case though,
yeah.
and I'll tell you why I think that's a worst case, because if we only have one shop, then you only have to focus on making sure when I come in, you're not screwing up your face.
Yeah.
You get what I'm showing you? Making sure that the products look like this is basic stuff. So maybe that's why we are not getting to the size of Procter and Gamble and whatnot, because you can't manage the little that you have. You know what I mean? And I don't want to sound negative because I feel like, again, things are changing. But I only want to highlight that as a means to say that if you are looking to compete in this space, understand what that means. End-to-end workflow processes are important.
Yeah.
And that means that every part of your end-to-end workflow process, marginally, you need to be looking at improving them. You get what I'm showing you, so that you can stay in the marketplace and compete. Don't take for granted that, you're a black business and turn up every Saturday, every first Saturday of the month and think that you're just going to get supported by the fact that you are a black business. That doesn't wash anymore.
Not alone, no. But I still think that we have to appreciate that it's still very early days of us having access to corporatism.
I say it's a mixed bag. I definitely believe it's a mixed bag.
I agree with what you're saying as well, is that we do have to meet the same corporate standards as our competitors, and not assume because people represent us that we can provide them with an inferior service, and they'll just be like, but we've got to support our own. Like, we have to, on the basis that it's our own, really, have maybe even better etiquette in the same way that all of our counterparts do as well. I agree. And I think that maybe the solution to that is, because it's important for us to provide solutions, is, not for everyone to feel like we have to work towards being this enormous faceless corporation, and that if you are working within a cottage industry and it's very small, there's nothing wrong with that. If you can provide yourself with an alternate source of income while maybe still having a job until you can make the jump, that's fine too. Or some of us, like, I think that, and this is not just something that's with our community, I think nowadays there's a lot more of a hustler mentality where everyone feels like the only position they can hold within the organization is an executive one, or one of a COO or a CEO, and that we can't all be bosses in that respect. I mean, boss is subjective, and there'll be parts of aspects of your job where you you are part of an ecosystem, rather than feeling like I've got to be on top and I resent anybody who's above me and I will work a certain way, because that mentality is something that in order for us to progress, we're going to have to get rid of. And we need to understand that it's happy for us to work alongside leadership, and we should be happy to, not just to be a cog and do as you're told, but learn the ropes.
But sometimes,
be open to be
sometimes
mentored.
you are a cog.
Yeah.
Sometimes you are a cog. I might feel like I'm a boss. You get what I mean? And I might get into a space where there's bosses that are actually in position doing their thing. So then I have to just fall in line if I really want to contribute to this. And it goes back to that same ethos we were talking about with Krept and Conan, having a small percent stake in something that's actually moving, rather than having 100% stake in something that is little to no like
Yeah, exactly.
activity.
Perfect
That
example.
doesn't, you get what I mean? Like, this is the same thing. If you're, I believe that there's so many. We provide services in so many places and spaces, or the similar spaces and places that we could collaborate more and create bigger businesses, and just let the bosses be who are the best. It's getting rid of that ego. It's knowing actually, you know what, he's a number one. He's the sort of person that's going to drive business and demand better business rates. So whatever the case may be, he's a better negotiator, however it works. I'm more an operator. I know how to operate this particular part of the business. Let me focus on that. You know what I mean? You know what? I just want to turn up to work and do my job.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in being a boss. You get what I'm showing you? Just know your role and just play that role to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
You get what I'm showing you? So I think there's nuanced issues there, but I feel like we are getting it. As a culture, we're moving forward. You know what I mean? But it's just good to highlight it and bring it to the fore.
Yeah, just I guess it's keep going. Just don't let standards slip.
See it there. That's it. Don't let the standards slip, man. Trust me. But moving on quickly, foreign policy and all of that stuff regarding Trump and the way that he's been dealing with immigrants or immigration and all that sort of thing. Now, what I really like about this, in theory, what I like about this is the same sort of policies that he's implementing with regards to immigration is the same sort of policies, in theory, African governments should be able to also implement without any worry of having any rebuttal from the US or any involvement from Western countries. What I say to you, bro?
Well, for me, the discussion about immigration and seeking asylum, for me, it really highlights the double standards and the hypocrisy of the West. Because as far as the UK and discussions about asylum seekers, or in the US, discussions about asylum seekers, from the Ukraine war, that talk was dead. When people were full, we don't have the resources, we can't take anybody out. When the Ukrainians needed somewhere to stay, they were welcomed. Not only were they welcomed, for you to take a Ukrainian into your home, you got paid. You would get paid.
Imagine.
And, you're not going to be able to convince me that every Ukrainian that has fled war in the Crimea or fled during this war is gainfully now employed in the UK and paying into our tax base or putting money into our economy. Because there would have been people that are too young to find work, or people that may not be qualified to work in the UK, or may have been in the process of getting a qualification. There's a number of reasons people fled for war. But these questions were not asked, and this is not and there was no side-eyeing of the Ukrainian humanitarian need for shelter and for asylum when they ran. Despite the fact that when people talk about asylum, it's like, well, why do they come to England, for example? Why do they come to America? There's plenty of European countries on the way from Africa here. Why don't they go there? The very same could be said of Ukrainians. Number of countries, Baltic countries, a lot of countries within, the Western Europe as well, Eastern Europe, and former Soviet bloc. But they come here. But I think that this foreign policy, that's what it shows me. If that's one thing to say, Donald Trump, he kind of highlights the hypocrisy as far as I'm concerned.
And that's why it sounds harsh, but this is why I say there's some good, because it feels to me like these are the sort of things that people need to see with their naked eye. It's like we need a wake up call.
Yeah,
we need a slap in the head. Like, look at see what I go on.
Yep.
So when you talk about the foreign policy and the immigration laws that he's implementing, he's involved, or the tweet that he put out the other day about that there's a certain type of people being discriminated in South Africa, and that the US are not going to have it. And I can't remember, there was a minister, a South African minister, was basically saying, listen, Trump, stay out of our business.
Yeah.
We ain't interfering with you in America. Leave us alone. We're going to live in South Africa, black and white, side by side. Basically, that was his message, which I thought was really honorable, considering nobody else wants to speak up to Trump like that. You get what I'm showing you. But then obviously we've spoken about Congo, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. Now the Congo thing probably needs a deeper dive, because I did some more research on that, and to understand the nuances and the tribal wars and how people from Rwanda have overspilled into Goma is a whole story in itself. And then how that's weaponized by the West to keep this destabilization going, just for the benefit of the minerals and so forth and so on.
It's happening in Nigeria as well now. The French have sent mercenaries to form this new. They formed a new Islamic militant group, which their name roughly translates to like no dancing, but the idea is that if you're dancing, this is haram, and so you'll be punished. But these are guys who are like maybe who have come from other countries and have been living in rural parts of Nigeria for a very long time, and are now being financially incentivized by Western powers to cause destabilization within Nigeria as well, because obviously Nigeria is massively oil rich in itself, and obviously has very valuable resources, also in the form of I think so uranium as well in Nigeria.
I don't know about you, Nigeria. I know that was it Mali or Niger, one of the two.
Niger is like I think it's like one of the primary 70% of all uranium France uses come from there.
Imagine.
Yeah, so this is how far they're prepared to go in order to consolidate their power. I think that in terms of American foreign policy, it's always something to be very wary of, because it's interesting that like we were told at the start of the century that Iraq were terrorists, despite the fact that there was no connection between the 9/11 bombers, because they were Saudi Arabian, and Iraq, and there's also no connection between Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. That's facts, and anyone can check that. No connection between them. That Iraq was ripe for regime change, in the same way that the Taliban was seen as terrorists in the eyes of American foreign policy, hence the invasion of 2001 and 2003 respectively. Now we move on, and this Taliban that was a threat that was supposed to be removed are now back in power. America's not saying nothing. Osama bin Laden was not even found in Afghanistan. He was found in Pakistan. And since Saddam Hussein has been removed from power in Iraq, we've seen the rise of ISIS, and now we have a new parliament in Iraq who have signed off on legislation for girls as young as 9 to be married off in child marriages, and that's become legal again. Now, me personally, if I was in charge of a free nation like the United States, and I heard as a country forcing 9-year-old girls to get married, then I would be like, we need to probably do something to help get rid of that government. But America seemed to be stum about this. Whereas before, when it was like, we don't really like how Saddam Hussein's flexing, even though they were fine giving him weapons when he was beefing with Iran, and also, you know, when he was beefing with the Kurds. But now all of a sudden, where he's no longer there, they got like basically a government full of child molesters. No one says that place is right for regime change.
I mean, and I hazard to say this, and I'm not saying at all that I agree with child molestation, but if that's the way a country decides to run its country, I don't feel like Trump has any reason to be in that country telling them otherwise. That's my belief. If you're a nationalist, be a nationalist, stay true to your word. This is why I'm interested to see what you're going to...
That's what I say, but on that basis with South Africa, he shouldn't be opening his mouth like that either.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You got what I mean? And it's the same with now, we're talking about Burkina Faso, where no, he hasn't said anything about... I want to see... These are the other things I'm interested to see what he said. He's already said he's got not much to say about Congo. You know, we haven't got there yet. Words to that effect. Basically, yeah, we're not saying nothing about that yet. But you've spoken about South Africa. I want to see what he's got to say about Niger. And
I mean, at the moment, there's been talk about, you know, an invasion of Canada and making Canada the 51st state, and also Mexico as well. And it's almost like he is trying to repeal the NAFTA, you know, North American Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah.
And he's trying to introduce tariffs and that, and basically go back on that.
And isn't Iceland a part of it?
Greenland.
Yeah, Greenland.
So Greenland is part of it as well. And I'm not sure what the part of Greenland is about. I'm not sure if I'm sure it will definitely come down to resources as well.
Yeah, it's definitely about resources.
Yeah, always.
But it's controlling the resources.
Yeah.
But the point being is, I'm more focusing it on our culture and saying, I see what you're doing out there, and I see what you're saying about America, making America great again. So if somebody in Africa says, I want to make X African nation great, not even again, let's just say great, just for the sake of argument. I want to see what's really going to be going in there.
We'll find out, because obviously it's not just Trump and it's CIA, and that's obviously something.
But then if you know anything about American politics, he's opposed to the CIA. He wants to kind of bring it into
that's interesting.
FBI and CIA and all the three-letter acronyms that...
That's interesting, because the last president that said that, now about to be releasing his files in the later part of the year.
Well, they already tried to assassinate Trump, so I mean, let's see how far that goes.
Did they though?
I mean...
I don't know.
I mean...
Did they though?
For me... I don't know. I do believe it. Like marginally, I do believe it. I do believe it.
Well, they're trying that hard though. I don't know. Like, I just feel like It came around at a very convenient time.
But for who though? This is the thing.
Well, if they were about to release files involving the president and Jeffrey Epstein, it's around the time when these files were released and Jeffrey Epstein had said that Trump was considered an asset, then it's very convenient that someone tries to kill Donald Trump. So who knows? Well, whether or not he was assassinated, we won't know at this particular time of recording. But what we do know is that if he does have the intention of addressing things like the CIA, that could have some serious ramifications for both America and I'd say for the culture as well, because that would be it'd be a very significant act.
And what you'll be seeing is the beginning of a liberation movement for the diaspora. You know what I mean? Which is, you know. But I want to bring it back to our shores a little bit. Yeah. Saw an interesting clip, Ep2, speaking about the cost price of an album as far as it concerns DSPs, which digital service platforms, that distribute music basically, and how somebody can access his music and someone who starts rapping today and puts out a record today for the same price. And his argument is that that shouldn't be the case. Yeah. That there should be a model in which you have to pay more for somebody to listen to someone who's more experienced like himself, someone who's more skilled and adept in the space than someone who just comes with like some sort of a slur rap and a all right beat and garner some attention.
It's interesting. I feel like it almost seems like what Ep2 is describing is independence. Because I mean, obviously, I guess, you know, it's very hard for you to even be remotely competitive as a music artist if you do not have access to digital streaming platforms for people to find your music. I do take on board what he's saying is that as a more established and more recognized brand, should the cost of his streams be the same as a new artist? I mean, I see the point in his particular case because obviously he's a very accomplished and very talented artist, but you know, tenure doesn't necessarily mean that you are a superior talent. I say that because for a very long time, you know, music was a very segregated world many decades ago, as was sports. And these were spaces that we weren't allowed to be in. And then once we got in there, we've been able to have success and command the justifiable remuneration and salaries and wages for what we do. So I kind of, in that respect, I kind of take I do understand what he's saying. But I think, to be quite honest, like but on so far as understanding, it sounds like you need your own straight to consumer model or paywall in order for you to provide that. Because if you do not want to be lost in a sea of this, I suppose, musical communism where you get the same despite the resources that you put into making an album, then you would have to have a paywall and be able to have the consumer name their price. And maybe this is the large conversation that needs to be had, not just with Ep2 but across the industry, that there are people that put in, you know, excruciating amount of time into their work and creating something, and they are treated like somebody who may be plucked from obscurity by the powers that be and put in a position of power in much more manufactured ways.
I would say, while I can see Retchie's point, I don't agree, based on the fact that when you're in a space to compete, you know what I mean, and it's your job. Like, even when you talk about content, which we're doing now, we at some point will be fighting, or when this is up, we'll be fighting for people's time and attention. We'll be competing with other content providers for their time and attention, and it's how best you get at doing that. So, like I said earlier, there's a workflow process. If you adhere to it and know how to marginally increase the value of your workflow within your workflow process, is the better at which you are more noticed or remunerated, or you know what I mean, you're seen in the spotlight, or whatever you deem as success. You know what I mean? So I don't necessarily agree in that, like, somebody who's a better rapper, let's just say it that way, a better rapper versus someone who started rapping today, doesn't have any the tunes crap. If that person has figured out how to access the market, then marginally they're doing a better job than you are.
Yeah, I mean, if it is that person in particular, but it's like I said, we can't say because I've been here for longer, I deserve more than you. But at the same time, you know, there's an element that argues that longevity should kind of be rewarded as well. But then, like I said, I think that the argument is really being made for, you know, artistic independence. Or I'm not sure if it's realistic to expect business models of DSPs to change, whereby they say, well, you've got this many albums on here, your discography is this big, so you can charge this much, because the idea is that the people are able to pay a fee, like with any streaming platform, in the same way that, like, if one rubbish director makes a film, like, to watch his film is not going to cost me any more or less than it is to watch a Scorsese film on the same streaming platform. The platform exists there to just provide this era of content where they just, it's more about their volume and what they have at their disposal, whether it's an established creative or it's a novice or a new creative. So the only way you're going to ensure that you have a better chance to be justly rewarded for your efforts is if you're an independent artist, or you're able to find some kind of way of going direct to your consumer. Because, you know, I
think that's the best.
You spoke about it last week when you said that Nipsey was selling units for 100. Only certain people are going to buy it necessarily. Or remember the Wu-Tang had their album and that Martin Shkreli bought it. So you have to have, I guess, it's the belief in your own source, innit?
Well, this is the thing. You can have an add-on if you're going to sign to it. My thing to somebody like Retch, or somebody who's, you know, very established and knows what they're doing, is if you're going to sign to a label or do anything with a label, don't sign everything. Sign the music and find some way in which you can market a different part or a different offering to your consumer base, direct to them for different price.
Because he got a vodka brand as well, right?
I don't know.
I'm sure. I think.
I'm sure he was involved.
He had like a vodka brand.
I
want to say Effin, but I think that's 50 Cent's one, isn't it? Yeah. But I think he had a vodka imprint as well.
But I juxtapose that conversation with the concert with Central C, and we've had quite a few conversations about Central C, and I'm not sure about. I say, Rago, I'm not sure about how. You know, people say that he's an industry plant. I'm not suggesting that he is, but I'm not sure about how this thing came about, or how he as an artist came about. So when you talk about someone who's really experienced and adept, to someone like Central C at his concert the other day, when he was talking about, you know, he probably doesn't know the lyrics to his songs, and this is what he's saying live on the mic to his crowd, like, so don't expect much, because man don't know the words in it. And
he was tired. Apparently, he was on for an hour and he was knackered because he's been touring so much. Because I guess the powers behind him are trying to get him as present as in as many spaces as possible. But I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I have my own theories about the whole Central C thing, because it always just seems strangely convenient. But around the time when you start seeing a budding interest in Black British music offerings, what tends to happen is that we get, particularly from Americans, where they may take the soundscape of the culture, well, not say with our face on it. Like, I like K Coke, for example. I think he's an amazing rapper. And I just think, Jay-Z, there's other rappers as well you could have signed to Rock Nation, as well as K Coke, because it's good. But then it's also like, was Rita Ora the best option to be signed to Rock Nation when she was? That I look at stuff like that. I look at things like, you know, I see how people reacted to Drill initially, and then when RD came out, there was a very different reception. And I just feel like sometimes Central C is another person whereby there seems to be this thing where media will try and utilize someone who's either white or racially ambivalent, in the case of Rita Ora, Central C, where there's aspects of blackness or reminders of blackness in their aesthetic, but it's not necessarily black. And it's like, it's not too black that people think that it's a black place, but it's black enough that when you hear it sonically, you can be fooled, kind of thing. And, you know, it's very similar to like the Kardashian effect, that it's like, there's enough that's reminiscent of kind of Afro aesthetics, whether it's like full lips and big bums and stuff like that, and olive skin or darker skin, but not so much that, you know, we're reminded of who we got this style from. And so if you was to talk to me about the whole industry plant thing, that is a bit where I'd be like, yeah, it seems kind of like
side-eyeing.
Because, like, you know, a lot of people also like Dave as well, and obviously there was a large push from Dave, but I don't really see it in the way I do see it with like Central C. And you know, personally, when I think of him, even as a West London rapper, compared to the likes of a AJ Tracy or a Digger D, I'm like, is he the best that we have? But I mean, because I just think who's determining it? Because I just think that I just think me personally, I'm very mindful of what people use to represent our culture and how much control we have over that. Because two things happen. Like I said, I feel like there's this idea to push blackness without a black face on it, particularly when it comes to exporting black British culture to the rest of the world. And I also feel like the other issue I tend to see is when black British artists do have success in the States, for example, that success is kind of downplayed over here in that, you know, some Americans don't even know that Slick Rick was British and born in London, or Sade, or Marcia Ambrosius, or LMI. Like, a lot of people don't know that these are British acts that have gone and had success in the States.
So are you saying that if, I'm going to say it just plainly, if Central C was black, same style, same vibes, everything else, but it was just black, it wouldn't have been as successful?
I am assured of that. Right. I mean, and that's just me. I just feel like, and I feel like there's a lot in that marketing as well, in that there's a lot of artists who co-opt black culture for what suits them. Yeah. But whether or not people want to acknowledge it, our creative expression has always been political, because it's been one of the only spaces that we get to be ourselves and talk about our experiences, the black experience. And so people tend to co-opt that and then not necessarily want to talk about aspects of the black experience. So when I look at somebody like Drake, for example, I'm always like, you know, there's a lot of accents, there's a lot of talk, and there's a lot of interacting, but you're quiet about things that affect the same people that you're jumping up on stage with. You know, when they was doing that 696 forms and no black people could perform in no nightclubs, I don't see no Drake saying nothing about it. And in the same way that, like, you know, Central C is someone that is Guyanese, I don't really hear him talking much about how something like the Windrush is going to affect him, or how like, we talk about trapping and stuff, but how racial profiling affects people that look like him.
And this is the thing, though. I feel like this is the big thing. What I'm talking about is things that are happening to us in our communities. But do we give a shit? And I'm going to keep asking that question, because it's like all of these things that you say.
Can I have a rebuttal question to that? And not to ask a question with a question, yeah? My question to that is, because I think that's a very good, and I think it's a very often asked collective question, particularly from people that are our age, and we've become very fucking fatigued from the ills of our society, of our community, yeah? Do people give a shit? My question is, do we have enough left to give a shit? Because what we say a lot of the time is, I am tired. I'm tired. And when you are fatigued and you're dealing with this all the time, do we still have the emotional capacity to continue to this drive? Not everyone's built for the war, you know.
I'm not even talking about just because what you have is, you tend to have people that are thought leaders then that will get to a stage where they say, I'm tired. I'm talking about the people that are not thought leaders, and not all of us are. Not all of us are bosses, and I'm not suggesting that everyone should be.
It's what it is.
It is what it is. But I'm just saying, do those people that are just consumers within our community and culture give a shit about the stuff that happens to us, or are they more concerned about the lifestyle and just living tomorrow, like just getting on with the next thing or whatever? Because if that's the case, then what really needs to happen for me is our thought leaders need to collectively come together and almost form like a consortium. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but it's got almost like we need to give out those people that don't give a shit, that are a part of our community, a reason to buy into the products and services that we provide and offer. You get what I mean? As opposed to going elsewhere, because they're gonna spend their money anyway. You get what I'm showing you? So let them spend their money with that collective thought bubble, so that then they can go and do things that will serve those same people, rather than it just being a thing where it's just wiry and it goes out of the community and we're not getting anything for it.
I hear it, and I think that the way I would describe that is studying business. They talk about the theory of retail therapy, and that people will go and purchase stuff to make them feel better about things, and it's an endorphin release from being able to get stuff. And, you know, we could argue that has been able to mutate into like just blind consumption where it's just that I don't want to know. I just want to be able to keep buying stuff, and having stuff will make me forget about what's outside, and it can be a method of escapism. And maybe the question is, and maybe that's the answer to the question, do we give a shit, is that we maybe give so much of a shit that it's put us in a position whereby we are trying our best to escape our situation in a lot of cases, and people feel like, you know, because I feel like, for example, we talk about Dubai, for example, and there are a lot of ills in terms of the Arab Emirates, in terms of treatment of certain ethnicities there, as well as their own foreign policy involving like Sudan, which we'll unpack at some point in this podcast. But I feel like it's very hard to be like, well, you're not going to Dubai for, bro. Like, what's wrong with you? Go to... When you are offered the opportunity as a black person with some money to enjoy a level of opulence where you don't also are not dealing with the typical paradigm of being in a inferior social status compared to your white counterparts in the West. When you go somewhere where you're like, oh, white people are in charge here and I don't get treated a certain way, and because you couldn't have money as a black person, yeah, in a white country, you can have money as a black person in a white country, but your money's no good here.
Yeah.
So, for example, Oprah Winfrey was the OG billionaire. Let's be real. When she went to Hermes, they wouldn't let her in.
Yeah.
This is Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah, it's mad. Listen, we need to...
That what happened to her in Dubai. Do you get me? So I think the question is about where we give a shit. I think is how much kind of shit can you give before you can't give any more? Might be the question, the answer to that question there, and that's what we want to unpack that.
I'm gonna think on that, and definitely we're gonna continue on that basis on the next podcast, on the next episode. So guys, for those of you that did join us, thank you very much. For all socials, you can catch us on MYB_pod UK everywhere, including YouTube. And Dane.
Yeah, when we're not talking the things that we need to be talking, I also do stand-up comedy as well. So you can check out my website for gigs, or just holler at me directly for a show near you. And you can also follow me on Dane Baptiste on all your good socials as well. So
yeah, and all the stuff will be in the show notes. So yeah, if you didn't catch it, rewind or look down. Don't know.
Big up,
Blessings.
yes,
yeah,
index.
man. Till next week.